Managing a small team or business comes with a unique set of challenges. With limited resources and manpower, it's easy for things to feel chaotic and out of your control. How can you, as a leader, accomplish your goals while keeping your team engaged, effective, and accountable? This podcast will give you practical strategies you can implement now to lead your team or business to reach its fullest potential. Welcome to the Organizing Chaos podcast with your host, Danny Coleman.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Organizing Chaos, where we discuss small practical strategies for small teams and small businesses. And thanks again. Thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I want to get right into it with this episode. In the last episode, I talked about the three types of meetings that you need to be having in your small team or small business regularly. And if you haven't heard that episode already, I suggest you go back and listen to it. It's a nice overview about these different meetings and why they're important. But just to summarize with one kind of easy statement is that all good relationships require regular communication, and that's what meetings are for a small team. Lots of times small teams or small businesses don't think that it's necessary to have meetings because they see each other all the time and they're in close proximity and they're not as large as a big organization might be. But that doesn't mean that they don't need to be having regular points that they can all be prepared and ready to have the best kind of undivided attention focused on communication. That's what meetings are. So without further ado, I want to do the first meeting, and I'm going to do a series. Basically, the next two episodes I do are going to be about the other two meetings I talk about. So this first one is the one for the top. If you think about your org chart, it's the top of your org chart. This is the same page meeting as it's referred to in the book Rocket Fuel by Mark Winters and Gino Wickman. Or you can call it the VI meeting, Visionary Integrator meeting. You can call it whatever you want. But what this is a meeting between the visionary and the integrator, or it's the owner and the general manager, if you will. It's number one and number two getting together to talk. Excuse me, you have to forgive me. I'm also kind of getting over a little bit of a cold sort of thing, something that did something to my throat, my voice. So if I have to clear my throat a few times, I apologize. But yeah, so that's what this meeting's all about. So I'm going to get right into it. There's three essential parts to this meeting. And I'll start out with just kind of saying, before I get into the details, that this can be fun and exciting. This doesn't have to be rigid and boring. You're a small business. Do whatever you want to do. Have your meeting outside, go to the bar, go to the coffee shop, do whatever, make it fun, make it interesting, but make it dedicated, treat it, a sacrosanct, if you will, don't let this meeting slide off your calendar or, you push it to another day or push it back a couple hours or whatever. Really, really do your best to just make sure this meeting happens. But like I said, make sure that you make it fun as well, or make it enjoyable to be there. That way you bring all your energy to it. So so the manager and the visionary can both kind of have the best conversation possible. So the first part of this is that you just want to have a check-in. This seems kind of ridiculous, or maybe kind of, I don't know, not impressive, but it's just checking in. The relationship that you have is like a marriage almost for a business between the owner and then the person running the day-to-day operations of the business. And so checking in personally is like, hey, how are things going? You doing okay? Just kind of, shooting the breeze a little bit. And then on top of that, also kind of making sure that they're happy with their jobs. Specifically the visionary to the integrator or visionary to the general manager. You need to be talking to the general manager and asking them like, hey, are you happy here? What's frustrating you? Is there anything that I could be doing better, to kind of empower you more or anything like that? So just have a check-in. Have a couple minutes where you kind of just talk casually, nothing specific, but obviously just keep it confined to a certain amount of time. Maybe try to 15, 20 minutes, depending on how long you're willing to do this meeting, but keep it confined to a smaller space so that you don't, run over on tangents. But I'll even say this, if it's an important conversation, maybe it's a conversation that needs to be had, don't feel like you got to stop it. That's why I have it first, because you never know, something may kind of come from that banter and conversation that's actually really important. Maybe something that hadn't been talked about that should have been talked about, or maybe some feelings that have been kind of getting buried by one party or the other. So this check-in is really important because what you're doing is you're just checking in as a person. You're checking in as a human with another human. So the next thing you want to move on to is the issues list. So your issues list is something that you should be compiling throughout the week or basically in between meetings. So when something kind of comes to your mind, you're like, man, you know what we should really need to do? We need to do X, Y, Z. Or you see some employee who's not doing all that well. Maybe you're the owner and you see an employee who's not doing all that well, and it's not in, you shouldn't be the one to reach out and reprimand this person, but it should come through the correct channels. So you're like, okay, I need to remember to mention that to my general manager or my integrator next time we have our VI meeting or our same page meeting, those types of things. So this issues list gets compiled throughout the week, and you want to make sure that you use this time during your meeting that's blocked out for getting through those issues. So the way that I do them is I've got the issues that I'm putting on there for my visionary, and then my visionary is putting stuff that he's got on there for me. And then when we get together, we kind of just go back tit for tat. Like he gets to pick one that we get into, and I get to pick one that we get into. And we just work our way through those. Now, sometimes we don't get through them all by the end of the call. And what's very important about this, by the way, is that you keep this meeting within the confines of the time that you blocked out for it. Because once you start going over, that's when you start really creating people who hate meetings. So it's really good to keep these in the right amount of time. So if you don't get through your issues list as soon as you need to, or as fast as you need to, that's okay. They can be able to go on to the next week. That's why it's important that you guys pick the ones that are most important to yourself, kind of going back and forth. That way you get through the ones that are usually the most pressing. And then if there are some other things that are important, but this maybe need to be talked about next week, you can push those off to next week or whenever you have your next meeting. And I will say another thing that's cool about that is that sometimes when you put some space in between you and an issue or something that you think was an issue, it actually ends up being a non-issue. You realize, you know what, that really wasn't all that important. But like at the moment, you're like, oh, I need to make sure I put that on the list so we talk about it. And then like if you go 2 weeks go by because you didn't fit it into the first meeting, 2 weeks go by or whenever you're at your second meeting and you see that again, you're like, that's not that big of a deal. So it kind of filters through things almost naturally, just because the way we are as humans, we see something and we think that suddenly it's like it needs to be dealt with now, or it's a fire, or it's a huge deal. But when we put some space in between ourselves and that issue, we realize it's not really that big of a deal. So that's kind of just like a good way to work through your issues list and realize that the things that you don't get to, it's kind of like a proving ground to see if they really are still an issue on the next time you guys meet. And then lastly, IDS. So that comes right from Rocket Fuel, the book I mentioned. Identify, discuss, solve. So it's really easy for these, when you start talking about these issues, for it to kind of just get spiral out of control. So a really good way to get through them is to kind of just make sure that you kind of are following this process. Okay, so you wrote down that the trash cans are too full, throughout the workday, that you're seeing trash cans too full. Okay. That's the issue. The issue is that, trash cans are too full. Okay, let's discuss that. Well, why do you think they're too full? Well, like we have the people or our associates go and check them, every 2 hours or every 3 hours or something like that, okay. Or, and that's the discussion part, right? And then you move on to solving. Okay, well, how are we going to make sure, like, if the trash cans are too full and we have something already going on that's supposed to deal with this, you guys can go back and forth about what you think is a good solution, and you move into that solution zone. So that may seem really obvious, but honestly, I've been a part of so many meetings where people just stay in the identify or the discuss phase, and they never move on to the solution phase or the solving phase. So make sure that when you're having these discussions, that when you've identified the issue, which is usually like the easiest thing to do, is just to see what's wrong. Discussion is always where you take a lot of time, but make sure you limit that and say, okay, and this falls on the general manager or the integrator more than anybody, is to say, okay, we've discussed this long enough. What's our solution? And you come up with a solution. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's got to be something so that you can move on to the next issue. So anyways, that was it. Hopefully this helped you in some way or another. It's really a lot of these things that I talk about I think they're kind of simple, and you may think that they're simple too, but sometimes articulating them is just the best way to kind of really understand how they should look and how they should feel. And this is the way that this meeting should go. And honestly, you can do this in an hour, maybe an hour and a half. I'm a big fan of doing once a week meetings. But by all means, don't do any more meetings than are profitable or beneficial for you and your team. So sometimes it means every other week or even once a month, perhaps. Anyways, you can do these meetings as often as you need to. Like I've said before, don't go longer than a month. You want it at least monthly, and then you can decide if it's biweekly for you or weekly. But whatever you do, just stick to that schedule. Make sure you're having that regular communication between the visionary and the integrator, and you will see huge benefits to your team, and just the speed at which you reach resolutions to problems is going to be way better than it has been in the past. So I hope that this was beneficial for you guys. If this resonated with you at all, or if you have any questions, or you have any, or maybe you want to contest me, you think that this is baloney, I'd love to hear that. I'm always open to comment suggestions. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Like and subscribe and all that fancy jazz, either on the podcast or on YouTube or on Spotify or Stitcher. And those reviews that you guys leave me really do help me out. I appreciate it a lot. I want to get this message into as many hands as possible. And my goal, like I said, I want to give small practical strategies to small teams and small businesses so that they can be awesome and fulfilling places to work. And I appreciate you guys helping me get that message out there. And by the way, I'll always put my magical little text below here if you're watching on YouTube, where my Instagram and Twitter profiles are. You guys feel free to interact with me there. I'd love to hear from you. Have a good one. See you later.
Want more? Go to DannyColeman.me to download Danny's free small business hiring guide, which includes tips, templates, and tools, plus a step-by-step process you can use to find and keep high-quality employees for your small team or business.